"Step away from the vehicle, sir. This isn't a place for people like you." The words didn't echo. They sliced, clean and deliberate, across the polished silence of the showroom, and for a moment, even the soft hum of overhead lights seemed to pause as if the building itself was listening, watching, waiting to see what would happen next, because in a space designed for wealth, for power, for quiet transactions measured in six-figure price tags, disrespect didn't just stand out, it detonated. And right there beside a midnight black $240,000 luxury sedan, Darius Cole turned his head slowly, not startled, not offended in any visible way, but measured, controlled, like a man who had heard that exact sentence before, just in different rooms, different cities, different decades, his reflection staring back at him from the mirror-like finish of the car's door, hoodie plain, sneakers clean but simple, nothing about him signaling the kind of money that usually walked into places like this. And that was the point, it had always been the point, because Darius didn't need to prove anything to anyone walking this floor, but the man standing a few feet away clearly thought otherwise. Ethan Walker, sales manager, press suit, perfect hair, the kind of confidence that came from thinking you understood exactly who belonged in your space and who didn't, his arms folded like a gate, like a wall, like a decision already made. "I said step away," he added, voice firmer now, louder, just enough to pull the attention of a nearby couple browsing a convertible, and a junior associate who suddenly found great interest in pretending to organize brochures, and still, Darius didn't move, not away from the car, not toward confrontation, just a slight shift of weight, his hand resting briefly on the cool metal of the vehicle as if acknowledging its craftsmanship rather than its price. "I was asking about this model," Darius said calmly, his tone even, almost quiet, but it cut through the tension without raising itself, and that seemed to irritate Ethan more than anything, because calm didn't fit the narrative he had already written in his head. "This model isn't for browsing," Ethan replied with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's for serious buyers." The emphasis deliberate, pointed, and just behind him, a man in a tailored navy suit stepped forward, holding a key fob, and Ethan turned instantly, posture shifting, voice softening. "Sir, right this way, I can get that ready for you." And just like that, the contrast was no longer subtle, it was staged, visible, undeniable, the kind of moment that doesn't need explanation because everyone in the room can feel it, even if they pretend not to. And from across the showroom, a young woman, early 20s, dealership badge still too new to be worn with confidence, watched the exchange, her brow tightening just slightly as she glanced from Darius to Ethan and back again, something about the scene not sitting right, not aligning with the training videos, the policies, the smiling corporate language about equal treatment and premium experience. But Ethan had already turned back, already decided this interaction was over. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the display area," he said, voice now louder, projecting authority, projecting control, and this time, a security guard near the glass entrance shifted his stance, not moving yet, but alert, ready, because that's how these things escalated, not all at once, but step by step, tone by tone, assumption by assumption, and still, Darius didn't react the way people expected, no raised voice, no visible anger, just a pause, a breath, his eyes scanning the showroom not in frustration but in calculation. As if he were taking inventory of something far more valuable than the cars themselves, and for a brief second, the world around him seemed to slow. The polished floors, the bright lighting, the faint scent of leather and new interiors blending into something distant, something familiar, because he had been here before, not in this building, but in this moment, years ago, standing in a bank where they questioned his signature, in an office where they questioned his credentials, in rooms where silence was mistaken for weakness, and every time, he learned the same lesson. You don't argue with people who have already decided who you are, you let them show you, fully, completely. And then you respond, not with noise, but with truth, and as the tension thickened, as the eyes in the room lingered just a little longer than before, as the line between customer and spectacle blurred, Darius reached into his pocket, not hurried, not hesitant, just precise, pulling out his phone and glancing at the screen for half a second before lifting it to his ear, his voice still calm, still measured, but now carrying something else beneath it, something heavier, something final. "Yeah," he said quietly, eyes forward, fixed not on Ethan but on the entire room that had unknowingly stepped into a story they didn't understand yet. "I need you to pull the full acquisition file on the Westbridge Auto Group, effective immediately." The line went quiet for half a second, not because the call had dropped but because on the other end someone was already moving, already pulling threads that most people in that showroom did not even know existed, and Darius lowered the phone slightly, not hanging up, just letting it rest near his ear as his eyes remained steady, scanning the room with a calm that did not belong in a moment like this. Because calm like that did not come from confidence alone, it came from certainty, and that was what Ethan missed, what everyone in that showroom missed, the difference between someone trying to prove they belonged and someone who never needed permission in the first place. "You making a call is not going to change anything," Ethan said, stepping closer now, his voice carrying more edge, more impatience, because control was starting to slip in ways he could not name yet, and that bothered him. "This is private property, and I am asking you to leave," he added, emphasizing each word as if repetition could make it true, and nearby, the couple by the convertible had stopped pretending not to watch, the woman's eyes flicking between Darius and Ethan, while the man shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but not yet choosing a side, while the young associate from earlier took a small step forward, hesitated, then stopped, her training colliding with the reality unfolding in front of her. Because this was not how customer interactions were supposed to look, not how they were presented in orientation videos or polished company handbooks, and still, no one intervened, not yet, because moments like this always hovered in that fragile space between discomfort and action, where people waited to see which direction the situation would break, and Darius, still holding the phone, spoke again, his voice low, precise. "Confirm ownership structure and send it to legal and executive operations," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to land, for the air to tighten around them. "And pull current management access for this location." There was no anger in his tone, no urgency, just instruction, clean and deliberate, the kind that assumed it would be followed, and that assumption alone was enough to shift something subtle in the room, a slight tilt in perception, a question forming in the back of a few minds that had not been there a minute ago, because people recognize authority even before they understand it, and Ethan felt it too. Even if he refused to acknowledge it, his jaw tightening slightly as he forced a short laugh. "You hear that?" he said, turning briefly toward the couple as if inviting them into the moment. "He thinks he can call someone and shut this place down." The attempt at humor landed flat, the silence heavier now, less passive, more charged, and from across the showroom, the young associate finally spoke, her voice careful but clear. "Sir, maybe we should just verify his information before asking him to leave," she said, directing the comment toward Ethan but keeping her eyes on Darius, searching, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she had been taught, and Ethan turned sharply, the shift immediate, defensive. "There is nothing to verify," he snapped, lower now but sharper. "We know exactly what this is." And that word hung there, unspoken but understood, assumption wrapped in certainty. And Darius lowered the phone completely this time, ending the call with a single tap, his gaze lifting slightly to meet Ethan's, not confrontational, not aggressive, just present, fully present in a way that made the space around them feel smaller, tighter, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away. "You are right about one thing," Darius said, his voice steady, each word measured. "You do know exactly what this is." And for a fraction of a second, Ethan hesitated, just enough to feel it, the shift, the imbalance, something moving beneath the surface that he could not control anymore, and at the front of the showroom, the security guard took a step forward, slow, deliberate, not yet intervening but no longer distant, his presence now part of the scene rather than outside it, and the young associate glanced at him, then back at Darius, her expression tightening as the weight of the moment settled in, because whatever was happening, it was no longer a simple misunderstanding, no longer something that could be smoothed over with a polite apology or a redirected conversation. It was becoming something else, something bigger, and Darius, standing beside the car he had not moved away from, placed his hand lightly against its surface again, not possessive, not hesitant, just steady, like a man grounding himself in a moment he had seen coming long before anyone else in the room realized they were part of it. And as the seconds stretched, as the silence deepened, a faint vibration echoed from somewhere behind the front desk, a notification, then another, subtle at first but growing, like the beginning of a ripple that would not stay contained, and Ethan's eyes flicked toward the sound instinctively, just for a moment, just long enough to break his focus, and that was all it took for the room to feel it, the shift from assumption to uncertainty, from control to something far more fragile. Because whatever Darius had just set in motion was no longer waiting, it had already begun. The sound came again, sharper this time, not loud but distinct enough to cut through the tension, a notification chime from behind the front desk, then another, and another, like something invisible was tapping on the walls of the showroom, insisting on being noticed, and the receptionist, who had been quietly watching everything unfold from her station, glanced down at her monitor. Her expression shifting from mild curiosity to something more focused, more alert, her fingers moving instinctively across the keyboard as new windows appeared on her screen, lines of text, system alerts, internal messages that did not usually arrive all at once, and across the room, Ethan saw it, not the content but the reaction, and that was enough to pull his attention again, just for a second, just long enough for the balance in the room to tilt a little further, because uncertainty, once introduced, spreads fast. "What is going on?" he asked, his tone no longer smooth, no longer controlled. A faint edge of irritation creeping in as he turned toward the desk, and the receptionist hesitated, not answering immediately, her eyes scanning the screen again as if making sure what she was seeing was real before she spoke. "I am getting a system alert," she said finally, her voice cautious. "Corporate access request, executive level." And the words landed heavier than she intended, because even she did not fully understand what they meant yet, but she knew enough to recognize they did not belong in a normal day at the showroom, and Ethan frowned, stepping halfway toward her. "That is not possible," he said quickly, almost reflexively, because in his world, things like that did not just happen without warning, without his knowledge, and yet the notifications continued, a quiet cascade of signals that something beyond the showroom floor had been set in motion, and behind him, the young associate took another step forward, her eyes now fixed on the desk, on the screen she could not see but could feel through the tension in the air, and Darius remained where he was, still, composed, his posture unchanged, as if the room was simply catching up to something he had already accepted as inevitable, and the security guard, now closer than before, slowed his approach, his attention shifting not just to Darius but to the entire space. Sensing that whatever was happening was no longer a routine removal, no longer a simple matter of policy, and for a brief moment, no one spoke, the silence stretching, thick and charged, until the receptionist's computer emitted a sharper tone, a different kind of alert, one that made her straighten instantly, her hand hovering over the mouse before clicking, opening a message that filled her screen, and this time, she did not hesitate. "Ethan," she said, her voice tighter now, more urgent. "There is an executive override request on this location." And that word, override, landed like a weight in the center of the room, because even those who did not fully understand it felt what it implied, that something above them, beyond them, was reaching down into their space, changing the rules in real time, and Ethan's expression hardened, confusion mixing with frustration as he stepped closer to the desk, trying to regain control through proximity, through authority. "Who authorized it?" he demanded, his voice lower now but sharper, and the receptionist swallowed, her eyes flicking once toward Darius before returning to the screen. "It is coming from corporate," she said. "Executive operations, and legal." And that was the moment the shift became undeniable, because those were not departments that appeared without reason, not for routine issues, not for misunderstandings on the showroom floor, and the couple by the convertible exchanged a glance, their curiosity now fully engaged, no longer passive observers but witnesses to something unfolding in real time, something that felt bigger than a single interaction, and the young associate took a breath, her voice quieter now but firmer. "Sir? I think we should stop and verify everything before we do anything else," she said again, this time not just suggesting but insisting, her eyes moving briefly to Darius, then back to Ethan, and for the first time, Ethan did not respond immediately. His attention split between the screen, the room, and the man he had already judged, because the certainty he had walked in with was beginning to crack, not shattered yet, but no longer solid, no longer reliable, and Darius, watching it all unfold, finally moved, just a small step forward, closing the distance by inches, not aggressively, not confrontationally, but enough to shift the dynamic, enough to make his presence unavoidable, and when he spoke, his voice was the same as before, calm, even, but now it carried something else, something final, something that did not ask for attention but commanded it anyway. You might want to read that carefully, he said, his gaze steady, not on Ethan alone but on the entire room, as if addressing everyone who had chosen to watch, to judge, to remain silent, and as the receptionist scrolled through the message, her eyes widening slightly with each line, the quiet realization began to settle over the showroom, slow but certain, like a tide coming in, that whatever they thought this moment was, it was not that anymore, it had already become something else entirely. The receptionist's hand slowed as she scrolled, her eyes moving left to right, then stopping, then going back again as if the words had rearranged themselves into something she was not prepared to process in real time, and the shift in her breathing was subtle but visible, a slight pause between inhale and exhale that did not belong in a routine system check, and Ethan noticed it, not the words on the screen but the reaction. Because reactions do not lie even when people try to control them. And his voice came sharper now, edged with something closer to urgency than authority. Read it, he said, not loud but firm, as if hearing it out loud would restore control, would bring the situation back into something familiar, something manageable, and the receptionist hesitated for just a fraction of a second before speaking, her voice careful, almost measured against the weight of each word. Executive authorization confirmed, ownership verification attached, directive issued to suspend local management access pending review. And the sentence did not echo, but it landed, heavy, final, like a door closing somewhere none of them could see, and for a moment, no one moved, not Ethan, not the security guard, not the couple near the convertible, because the meaning did not arrive all at once. It unfolded piece by piece, settling into the room like something undeniable, and Ethan's expression shifted, not dramatically, not yet, but enough, the confidence that had framed his posture beginning to fracture at the edges. That does not make sense, he said quickly, almost too quickly, as if speed alone could outrun what was happening. There has to be a mistake. And the receptionist looked up at him then, not uncertain anymore, but grounded in what she had just read. It is not a mistake, she said quietly, and then, almost involuntarily, her gaze moved past him, landing on Darius, and that was the moment the room followed her eyes, because people follow direction even when they do not realize they are doing it, and suddenly, the man who had been dismissed, redirected, told to leave, was no longer just a presence at the edge of the situation, he was at the center of it. And Darius did not step forward again, did not raise his voice, did not claim anything he had not already set in motion, he simply stood there, composed, his expression unchanged, as if the outcome unfolding around him had been decided long before anyone else noticed the first sign of it, and the young associate felt it fully now, the realization settling into her posture, her shoulders tightening slightly as she looked from the screen to Darius and back again, connecting the pieces in a way that could no longer be ignored. Sir? She began, her voice softer now, directed at Ethan but shaped by something else, something closer to concern than protocol. We should stop this. And the words carried further than she intended, because the room was quiet enough to hold them, to amplify them, and Ethan turned toward her, his reaction immediate, defensive. Stop what? He asked, but the question lacked the certainty it had a minute ago, because deep down, he already knew the answer, and before she could respond, the system chimed again, a new alert, sharper, more direct, and the receptionist's screen refreshed, the message expanding into something larger, something official, stamped with identifiers that did not belong to local management, and this time, she did not read it out loud immediately, she just stared, her eyes widening just slightly before she spoke again, her voice steadier now, but carrying the weight of confirmation access. "Privileges for this location are being reassigned," she said. "Effective immediately." And the finality in those two words changed everything, because effective immediately does not wait, it does not negotiate, it does not leave room for interpretation, it acts, and in that instant, Ethan's tablet, resting on the counter behind him, lit up, then dimmed, then flashed again, and he turned instinctively, reaching for it, tapping the screen once, then again, his movements sharper now, less controlled, as he tried to navigate a system that was no longer responding the way it always had. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, and the security guard, still standing just a few feet away, lowered his stance slightly, not retreating, but no longer advancing either, because the authority he was meant to support was shifting, dissolving in front of him, and the couple near the convertible had stopped pretending entirely now, their attention fixed. Their expressions no longer curious but intent, as if they understood they were witnessing something rare, something that did not happen in places like this, not out in the open, not in real time, and Darius finally spoke again, his voice unchanged, steady, grounded, but now carrying a clarity that cut through everything else in the room. "You asked me to leave," he said, not accusing, not emotional, just stating a fact that no one could deny. "But you never asked who you were speaking to." And the sentence did not rise, it did not need to, because its weight was already enough, and as the words settled, as the system continued to update behind the desk, as the structure everyone in that showroom relied on began to rearrange itself without warning, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer a customer being turned away, this was a system correcting itself, live, in front of everyone who had chosen to watch. The air in the showroom did not just feel different now, it felt divided, like an invisible line had been drawn across the polished floor separating what people thought this moment was from what it had become, and no one could step back across it even if they wanted to, because the system had already moved, already made decisions that no one on that floor had the authority to reverse. And Ethan stood there holding the tablet that no longer obeyed him, his thumb tapping the screen again as if persistence alone could bring it back. But the interface had changed, options missing, access restricted, the familiar layout now foreign in his hands, and that was when the realization began to surface, not all at once, but in fragments, small pieces of understanding pushing through the resistance he had built around himself. "This is not possible," he said again, quieter this time, less for the room and more for himself, because certainty, once broken, does not shatter cleanly, it fractures. Slowly, and behind the desk, the receptionist's screen updated again, a new message sliding into view with a tone that carried finality, not urgency, not warning, just confirmation, and she read it silently at first, her lips parting slightly before she spoke. "Local management access revoked," she said, her voice steady but unmistakably different now, no longer cautious, no longer uncertain. "Pending executive review." And the words settled into the room like a verdict, and the young associate felt it fully now, her posture shifting as she stepped slightly to the side, not away from Ethan but no longer aligned with him either, her position changing in a way that did not need explanation, because alignment, like authority, reveals itself in moments like this, and the security guard, who had been ready to act just minutes ago, now stood still, his stance neutral, his gaze moving from Ethan to Darius and back again. Recalibrating, because his role was not to question authority, only to recognize it, and what he was seeing no longer matched what he had been told at the start of this moment, and across the showroom, the couple near the convertible had moved closer, not enough to intrude, but enough to hear, enough to witness clearly, the woman's expression no longer uncertain but resolute, as if she had already decided what this moment meant, and Darius, still composed, still grounded, took a slow step forward, closing the distance not with force but with presence, his movement quiet but deliberate, the kind that shifts attention without demanding it, and when he spoke, his voice remained even, controlled, but now it carried something unmistakable, something that no longer needed to be proven because it was already unfolding in front of everyone. "You built your judgment in seconds," he said, looking directly at Ethan, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with clarity. But systems take longer to correct. And the sentence lingered, not because it was loud, but because it was precise, and Ethan looked at him then, really looked this time, not at the clothes, not at the surface, but at the presence, at the calm that had not wavered once since the moment this started, and something in that calm unsettled him more than anything else, because it suggested control, not over the conversation, but over the outcome. And outcomes were the one thing he had believed he owned here, and behind him, the tablet buzzed again, a final notification pushing through, and he stared at it, reading silently this time, his eyes moving faster now, scanning, searching for something to anchor himself to, but the message did not offer that, it only confirmed what had already begun, and his grip on the device tightened slightly before loosening again, because resistance, at this point, had nowhere left to go, and the receptionist cleared her throat softly, drawing attention without meaning to. "There is more," she said, her voice careful but firm. "Executive directive requires immediate compliance and full cooperation from all staff on site." And the phrase full cooperation did not sound like a suggestion, it sounded like instruction, like expectation, like a line that had already been crossed, and the young associate nodded almost instinctively, her training finally aligning with what was happening, not the version she had been told to expect, but the one unfolding in real time, and the security guard took a step back, not retreating, but repositioning, signaling without words that his role had changed, that whatever authority he had been prepared to enforce was no longer active, and Darius let the silence settle for a moment, not rushing to fill it, not pushing the moment forward, because he did not need to, the system was already doing that for him, and then, with the same calm that had defined every word he had spoken since the beginning, he added, "This is not about a car." His gaze steady, his tone unwavering. "It is about how quickly you decided I did not belong near one." And the truth in that statement did not need emphasis, it did not need repetition, it simply existed, undeniable, and as the showroom stood suspended in that realization, one thing became clear to everyone present: this was no longer a situation that could be corrected with an apology or explained away with policy. It had moved beyond that, into something final, something that would not reset when the moment ended, because the moment was not ending, it was transforming, and everyone in that room was already part of what came next. For a brief moment, no one spoke, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that needed to be understood was already unfolding in front of them. And understanding like that does not arrive with noise, it settles in silence, heavy and undeniable, and Ethan stood there, no longer at the center of control but at the edge of something slipping away from him, his shoulders slightly tighter now. His stance no longer grounded in certainty but held together by habit, by the last fragments of authority he believed he still had, and his eyes moved across the room, searching, not for answers, but for alignment, for someone to reinforce what he had said earlier, for someone to confirm that this moment could still be contained, but no one stepped forward, not the receptionist, not the young associate, not the security guard, because alignment had already shifted, quietly, completely. And once that shift happens, it does not reverse, it settles into place, and the absence of support spoke louder than any argument could have. "This is getting out of hand," Ethan said finally, his voice lower now, more controlled, but lacking the sharp edge it carried before, because control without backing is just performance, and performance breaks under pressure, and Darius watched him, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, just with clarity, the kind of clarity that comes from seeing a pattern repeat itself one too many times, and for a brief second, something moved behind his eyes, not anger, not frustration, but memory, quiet and precise, the kind that does not interrupt the present, but informs it, shapes it, grounds it, because this moment was not new, it was familiar, too familiar, and years earlier, in a much smaller room, under much dimmer lights, he had stood across from a man who spoke in the same tone, carried the same assumptions, used the same quiet dismissal wrapped in polite language, telling him that his application did not meet the standard, that his profile did not align with expectations, that perhaps he should explore other opportunities more suited to his background, and back then, There had been no system alert, no executive override, no silent shift in power, just a closed door and a quiet understanding of what had really happened, and that memory did not sting anymore. It did not need to. It had already done its work. It had shaped the decisions, the discipline, the patience that stood in this room now, and Darius blinked once, the memory passing as quickly as it came, leaving behind only focus, only presence, and when he spoke again, his voice carried that weight, not heavy, not emotional, just grounded. Out of hand is when no one is accountable, he said, his gaze steady, his tone unchanged. This is just clarity. And the distinction landed, subtle but sharp, because clarity does not argue, it reveals, and across the showroom, the young associate felt it fully now, her hesitation gone, replaced by something more certain, more aligned, and she stepped forward again, this time not cautiously, not uncertainly, but with intent. Her voice clear as she addressed the receptionist. Can you confirm the name attached to the authorization? She asked, not because she needed to know, but because the room did. Because sometimes truth needs to be spoken out loud for everyone to hear it, to accept it, to process it, and the receptionist nodded slowly, her fingers moving across the keyboard one more time before stopping, her eyes scanning the screen, then lifting, meeting the room, and for a fraction of a second, her gaze rested on Darius before she spoke. Authorization is linked to Darius Cole, she said, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying more weight than the last. And the name did not echo, but it changed the room, completely, instantly, because names, when tied to power, do not need volume, they need recognition, and Ethan's expression shifted again, this time more visibly, the resistance finally cracking as recognition pushed through disbelief, because he had heard that name before, not here, not in this context, but in meetings, in reports, in conversations that existed above his level, above his reach. And the connection, once made, could not be undone, and the silence that followed was different now, not tense, not uncertain, but settled, like a decision that had already been made. And Darius did not step forward, did not claim anything beyond what had already been confirmed. Because he did not need to, the system had spoken, the room had heard, and the truth now existed in a space where denial no longer held, and as Ethan stood there, the last fragments of his earlier certainty dissolving into something quieter, something smaller, one thing became unmistakably clear: this was never about removing a man from a showroom, it was about revealing who had the authority to stand in it all along. The name did not just sit in the air, it reshaped it, like the entire showroom had been quietly rearranged around a truth no one could ignore anymore, and for a second, Ethan did not move, did not speak. Because recognition has a way of freezing you in place when it arrives too late, when it collides with everything you have already said, everything you have already done. And the gap between who he thought he was dealing with and who stood in front of him now was no longer something he could bridge with explanation or correction. It was too wide, too exposed, and the room felt it, every person in it, from the receptionist standing behind the desk with her hands now still on the keyboard, to the young associate who had stepped fully out of the background and into the moment, to the security guard whose stance had softened into something neutral, observant, no longer aligned with any single instruction but instead with the reality unfolding in front of him, and even the couple who had come in to browse cars now stood as witnesses, their attention fixed, their earlier curiosity replaced with something more grounded, more aware, because what they were seeing was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a correction, a reversal, a quiet collapse of assumptions that had been spoken out loud just minutes ago, and Ethan finally exhaled, a small, controlled breath, as if trying to reset himself, to gather what was left of his authority into something usable, something that could still function in this new reality. Mr. Cole, he said, the name coming out carefully, deliberately, like it needed to be placed correctly in order to matter, and that alone marked the shift. Because before, there had been no name, no identity beyond assumption, just a judgment delivered with confidence, and now there was recognition, late, but unavoidable, and Darius met his gaze, not cold, not distant, just steady, present, the same composure he had carried from the beginning, unchanged by the shift around him, because his position had not changed, only their understanding of it had. and that difference mattered. If there has been any misunderstanding, Ethan continued, his tone adjusting, smoothing out, searching for ground that no longer existed beneath him. We can resolve this professionally. And the word professionally lingered in the space between them, fragile, uncertain. Because professionalism is not something you introduce after the moment has already broken, it is something you either carry from the start or you do not, and the young associate felt that immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly as she listened, not in disagreement, but in recognition of the timing, of what had just been said compared to what had been said before, and Darius let the silence stretch for a second. Not rejecting the statement, not accepting it, just allowing it to exist long enough for everyone in the room to measure it against what they had witnessed, and when he spoke, his voice was still calm, still controlled, but now there was a weight to it that did not come from volume, it came from contrast. Professional would have been asking a question before making a decision, he said, his words clear, direct, not sharp but undeniable, and the distinction landed immediately, because it did not accuse, it clarified, and clarity, once spoken, cannot be undone, and Ethan's posture shifted again, his shoulders pulling back slightly as if trying to regain a shape that no longer fit the moment. We were following standard procedure, he replied, but the sentence lacked conviction, it sounded rehearsed, disconnected from the reality that had just unfolded, and the receptionist looked down at her screen again, then back up, as if the system itself had already answered that claim in ways no one could argue with, and the young associate spoke again, this time without hesitation, her voice steady, grounded in what she had seen. Procedure does not skip verification, she said, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear, and the room shifted again, not dramatically, but enough, because when someone inside the system speaks against it, even slightly, it changes how the moment is understood, it reinforces what has already begun to settle, and Ethan glanced at her, just briefly, then back at Darius, the space around him feeling smaller now, more confined, not physically, but structurally, like the framework he had been operating within had collapsed and left him exposed, and Darius did not step closer, did not raise his voice, did not escalate anything beyond what had already been set in motion, he simply held his position, his presence enough, his silence between words carrying more weight than any argument could. And behind the desk, another notification appeared, quieter this time, but no less significant, and the receptionist read it, then looked up, her voice steady as she spoke. Executive review team is en route. And that sentence sealed it, not with drama, not with intensity, but with inevitability, because en route means it is already happening, already in motion, already beyond the control of anyone in that room, and as the realization settled fully, as the last traces of assumption dissolved into something far more concrete, one truth stood clear above everything else. This moment was never about a customer being denied service, it was about a system revealing exactly who it had been serving all along, and correcting itself in front of everyone who had chosen not to question it. The words en route did not just signal movement, they signaled inevitability, and the moment that realization settled into the room, something quieter followed, something deeper than tension, because tension expects resolution, but this was already resolved, just not yet fully revealed. And Darius stood there in that stillness, his posture unchanged, his expression steady, but inside, something shifted. Not outwardly visible, not dramatic, just a subtle recalibration that came from memory. Rising again, uninvited but precise, because moments like this did not exist in isolation, they connected, they echoed, they built on each other over time, and for a brief second, the showroom faded, not physically, but in his mind, replaced by a much smaller space, a dealership years ago, fluorescent lights harsher, floors less polished, but the tone exactly the same, the glance from across the room, the pause before being acknowledged, the question that was not really a question, just a way to confirm a decision already made. Are you sure you can afford this model? And back then, he had answered calmly, respectfully, explaining, providing, proving, thinking that information could correct perception, that facts could override assumption, and he remembered the smile that followed, polite but dismissive, the kind that does not argue because it does not need to, it has already decided, and he remembered leaving that place not angry, not loud, just quiet, carrying something heavier than frustration, something sharper, something that did not fade, and that moment had followed him, not as pain, but as clarity, shaping the way he moved, the way he built. The way he understood that power is not about convincing people who doubt you, it is about creating systems where their doubt no longer matters. And the showroom came back into focus just as quickly as it had faded, the polished floors, the controlled lighting, the silence that now carried weight instead of judgment, and Darius exhaled slowly, not out of relief, not out of tension, but as a marker, a transition from memory back into the present, where the outcome was no longer uncertain, and across from him, Ethan shifted again. The earlier attempt at composure thinning as time stretched, because waiting, when you do not control what comes next, has a way of exposing everything you were trying to hold together, and he glanced toward the entrance briefly, then back at Darius, then toward the desk, as if trying to track the situation from multiple angles at once. But there was no angle left that gave him control, and that realization settled into his posture, subtle but visible. His shoulders no longer squared in authority, but held in place by something closer to uncertainty, and the young associate watched it. All, her understanding now complete, not just of what was happening, but of what had already happened, the earlier comments, the assumptions, the way the interaction had unfolded before anyone thought to ask a single question, and she looked down briefly, not in avoidance, but in reflection, because witnessing something like this changes how you see everything that came before it, and behind the desk, the receptionist's screen refreshed again, not with urgency, but with confirmation, timestamps, documentation, a record forming in real time, capturing everything that had been said, everything that had been done, and she swallowed lightly, aware now that this moment was no longer just an interaction, it was evidence, it was part of something larger, something that extended beyond the showroom, beyond the people in it. And the security guard shifted his stance once more, stepping slightly to the side, creating space, rather than closing it, because his role had fully transitioned now, no longer enforcing a decision, but observing the outcome of one that had already been made at a higher level, and the couple near the convertible stood still, their earlier interest now replaced with a kind of quiet awareness, the understanding that they were watching something real, something that did not need exaggeration or escalation to carry weight. And Darius finally spoke again, his voice unchanged, steady, but now carrying a depth that came from everything behind it, not just this moment, but all the ones that had led to it. "This is the part people misunderstand," he said, not directing the statement at anyone in particular, but allowing it to settle into the room as a whole. "They think the moment is when everything changes." And he paused briefly, not for effect, but because the truth did not need to be rushed. "But the moment is just when everything is revealed." And the distinction landed, quiet but sharp, because it reframed everything, not just what was happening now, but what had happened before, and as the words settled, as the silence returned, heavier now but clearer, the faint sound of a vehicle pulling into the lot outside broke through the stillness, subtle but distinct, followed by the soft closing of a car door, and no one needed to be told what that meant, because en route had just arrived. And whatever came next was no longer something anyone in that room could influence, only witness. The sound of the car door closing outside did not rush the moment, it deepened it, because arrival does not create pressure when the outcome is already decided, it confirms it, and inside the showroom, no one moved immediately, as if stepping too soon would break something that had already shifted beyond repair, and the faint echo of footsteps approached through the glass entrance, steady, measured, not hurried, the kind of pace that carries authority without needing to announce it. And Ethan felt it before he saw it, the same way he had felt the shift in the room minutes earlier but chose not to acknowledge it, and this time there was no ignoring it, because it was no longer abstract, it was physical, it was entering the space he thought he controlled, and the door opened with a soft mechanical sound, smooth and quiet. And two individuals stepped inside, dressed not in uniform, not in anything that demanded attention, but in the kind of understated professionalism that does not need recognition to be understood, and the receptionist straightened instinctively, not out of fear, but out of awareness, her posture aligning with the reality that had been building on her screen, and the young associate turned fully toward the entrance now, her expression focused. Her earlier uncertainty replaced with clarity, because this was the confirmation, the visible extension of everything that had been happening behind the scenes, and the security guard stepped slightly aside, creating a clear path without being asked, because authority like this does not need instruction, it is recognized, and it is respected, and as the two individuals approached, their attention did not scatter across the room, it did not linger on the customers or the displays, it moved directly, deliberately, to Darius. And that alone reshaped everything, because direction reveals alignment, and alignment reveals truth, and one of them, a woman with a tablet held at her side, stopped a few feet from him, her voice calm, professional, but carrying a certainty that did not need emphasis. "Mr. Cole," she said, a slight nod accompanying the words, not formal, not exaggerated, just precise. "We have confirmed full authorization and initiated compliance review for this location." And the statement did not ask anything, it did not seek approval, it simply confirmed that what had been said in motion was now fully active, fully recognized, and fully irreversible, and Darius acknowledged her with a small nod, nothing more, because there was nothing more required, the system had already spoken, the process was already moving, and the room felt it, not as tension, not as conflict, but as finality, and Ethan stood there, watching it unfold, the last threads of his earlier authority unraveling not with resistance, but with realization, because there was no argument left to make, no position left to defend, and the second individual, a man standing slightly behind the first, turned his attention toward the desk, toward the systems, toward the structure that had just been overridden, and his voice, when he spoke, was just as measured, just as controlled. "We will need immediate access to all local management records and system logs," he said, not directing the request at Ethan specifically, but the implication was clear, because the structure of responsibility had already been reassigned, and the receptionist nodded quickly, her hands moving across the keyboard without hesitation now, because clarity removes doubt, and doubt is what slows action, and there was no doubt left in the room, not about what was happening, not about who held authority, and the young associate stepped slightly to the side, making space. Her position now fully aligned with the process rather than the conflict that had preceded it, and the couple near the convertible remained still, their presence quiet but intentional, witnesses to a moment that had shifted from tension to transformation without raising its voice, and Darius stood at the center of it all, unchanged, not elevated by the moment, not defined by it, just present within it, as if this outcome had always been the destination, and everything else had simply been the path leading to it. And after a brief pause, he spoke again, his voice steady, grounded, carrying the same clarity that had defined every word he had spoken since the beginning. "Make sure the review includes every interaction from the moment I walked in," he said, not as a demand, but as a directive that required no reinforcement, and the woman nodded once, her expression unchanged. "It is already being documented," she replied, and that was the final shift, not loud, not dramatic, but complete, because documentation means accountability, and accountability means consequence, and as the system continued to update, as access continued to shift, as the structure of authority settled into its new alignment, one truth became fully visible to everyone in that showroom, not just understood, but undeniable. This was never about whether he belonged in that space, it was about who had the power to define it, and that question had already been answered. No one interrupted the process once it began, because interruption implies control, and control had already shifted, fully and visibly. And the showroom that once felt curated, controlled, predictable, now felt like a stage where every detail was being examined in real time, not by customers, but by the very system that sustained it, and the two representatives moved with quiet efficiency, not rushing, not hesitating, their presence not loud but definitive, the kind of presence that does not escalate a situation but concludes it. And the man stepped toward the main terminal behind the desk, his hand gesturing lightly toward the screen as he spoke. "Please maintain access while we mirror the system logs," he said, his tone neutral, procedural, as if this were routine, as if moments like this happened every day, even though everyone in the room knew they did not, and the receptionist nodded immediately, her movements precise now, aligned, no longer uncertain, because uncertainty had been replaced with instruction, and instruction had been replaced with execution, and the woman with the tablet turned slightly, her attention shifting from Darius to Ethan, not confrontational, not accusatory, just direct, and that directness carried more weight than any raised voice could have. "Mr. Walker," she said, her tone calm, but the use of his name now felt different, stripped of the authority it once held. "Your access credentials have been suspended pending review." And the sentence did not need repetition, it did not need explanation, because its meaning was already clear, already confirmed by the system that had stopped responding to him minutes ago, and Ethan stood there, absorbing it, not reacting immediately, because reaction requires ground to stand on, and his ground had already been removed, not forcefully, not dramatically, but completely, and for a moment, he looked at the tablet in his hand again, as if expecting it to contradict what had just been said, but it did not, it remained silent, inactive, reflecting back only his own uncertainty, and slowly, almost unconsciously, his grip loosened, his arm lowering slightly to his side, the gesture small but significant, because it marked the moment he stopped trying to control what was happening and started understanding that he could not, and the young associate watched it all with a clarity that felt heavier than anything she had experienced in her short time there, because this was not just a correction of behavior, it was a restructuring of reality. A moment where everything she had been told about professionalism, about customer service, about assumptions and appearances, was being tested, exposed, and rewritten in front of her, and she stood still, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, because sometimes the most important thing you can do in a moment like this is witness it fully, understand it completely, and carry it forward, and the security guard remained where he was, no longer a participant, just an observer. His earlier readiness replaced with neutrality, because his role had ended the moment authority changed direction, and across the showroom, the couple near the convertible exchanged a glance, not confused, not uncertain, but acknowledging what they had just seen, the shift from dismissal to recognition, from assumption to accountability, from surface to substance, and Darius remained at the center of it, not elevated, not performing, just present, his posture unchanged, his expression steady. As if none of this surprised him, as if it had always been inevitable, and in a way it had, because moments like this are not created in seconds, they are built over years, shaped by decisions, reinforced by patterns, until one day, they surface, undeniable, irreversible, and after a brief pause, the woman with the tablet spoke again, her voice still calm, still measured, but now carrying the next step forward. "Effective immediately, operations at this location are under executive review," she said, her eyes moving briefly across the room before returning to Darius. "All transactions are temporarily suspended pending compliance clearance." And the words did not disrupt the space, they settled into it, confirming what everyone already felt, that this was no longer a place operating under its own authority, it had been absorbed into something larger, something more precise, and Ethan inhaled slowly, his shoulders rising and falling in a controlled motion, as if trying to steady himself within a structure that no longer supported him, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, not defeated, but stripped of the certainty it once carried. "What happens now?" he asked, not directing the question at anyone in particular, because for the first time, he did not know who held the answer, and the man at the terminal did not look up immediately, his focus still on the system as he responded. "Now the review determines what should have happened before," he said, his tone neutral, factual, and that was the final layer, the final shift. Because what should have happened before is not just a statement, it is a standard, a measure, a reflection of everything that had been missed, ignored, or assumed, and as the system continued to process, as the showroom settled into its new reality, one truth stood clearer than anything else: this moment was not about punishment, it was about correction, not loud, not dramatic, but precise, and in that precision, there was no room left for misunderstanding, only understanding. The room did not return to normal, because moments like this do not reset, they redefine, and as the system continued to process in the background, quiet but constant, the showroom itself felt different, not just in atmosphere, but in structure, as if the invisible hierarchy that once dictated every interaction had been exposed and rearranged in real time, and no one in that space could unsee it, could unknow it, could return to the version of the environment they had walked into earlier, and Ethan stood still, no longer trying to move ahead of the moment, no longer trying to control it, because the realization had settled fully now, not as shock, not as panic, but as clarity, the kind that leaves no room for denial, and his eyes moved once more across the room, not searching this time, but acknowledging the receptionist at her station now fully aligned with the executive process. The young associate standing with a posture that no longer hesitated, the security guard positioned as an observer rather than an enforcer, and at the center of it all Darius, unchanged, unaffected by the shift because he had never been beneath it to begin with, and that understanding carried weight, not loud, not aggressive, but undeniable, and after a moment, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter now, measured in a different way, not authoritative, but reflective. "I made an assumption," he said, the words simple, stripped of defense, and for the first time since this began, there was no attempt to reshape the narrative, no attempt to redirect or justify, just a statement, clear and contained, and the room absorbed it without reaction, because acknowledgement does not erase action, it only defines it more clearly, and Darius listened, not interrupting, not responding immediately, allowing the words to exist on their own, because some statements do not need to be challenged, they need to be understood, and the woman with the tablet glanced briefly between them, not intervening, not guiding, because this part of the moment did not belong to the system, it belonged to the individuals within it, and Ethan continued, his tone steady, but carrying something different now, something that had not been present before. "I saw what I expected to see," he added, and that sentence carried more truth than anything he had said earlier, because expectation shapes perception long before facts are considered, and, once spoken, it revealed more than any explanation could have, and the young associate lowered her gaze slightly, not in avoidance, but in recognition, because she had seen it too, not just in this moment, but in smaller moments before it, interactions that felt slightly off, decisions that were made too quickly, judgments that were never questioned, and now, standing in this space where everything had been brought into the open, those patterns were impossible to ignore, and Darius finally spoke, his voice calm, unchanged, but now carrying the final layer of clarity that had been building throughout the entire moment. "Expectation is not the problem," he said, his gaze steady, not confrontational, just direct. "It is when expectation replaces verification that it becomes something else." And the distinction settled into the room with precision, because it did not accuse, it did not escalate, it defined, and definition has a way of removing all ambiguity, and Ethan nodded slightly. Not in agreement, but in understanding, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to defend, only something to absorb, something that would remain long after this moment ended, and behind them, the system continued its quiet work, logs compiling, access shifting, documentation forming, the process moving forward with or without anyone's acknowledgement, because accountability does not wait for comfort. It operates on fact, on record, on truth, and the man at the terminal stepped back slightly, his task progressing, his presence now less central because the system itself was carrying the weight of the moment forward, and the receptionist glanced once more at her screen, then at Darius, her expression steady, respectful, not out of obligation, but out of recognition, because recognition, when it arrives honestly, does not need to be forced, and the couple near the convertible stood quietly. Their earlier role as observers now transformed into something more reflective, as if they were processing not just what had happened, but what it meant, beyond this room, beyond this moment, and Darius took a slow breath, not out of tension, not out of relief, but as a natural continuation of presence, because for him, this was not a victory, not a confrontation one, it was a correction, a necessary alignment between reality and perception, and when he spoke again, his voice remained steady, grounded, but now carried a finality that did not need reinforcement. "You did not see me," he said, not harsh, not emotional, just true. "You saw a version of me that fit your expectation." And the sentence held the entire moment within it, from the first words spoken to the final shift in authority, and as it settled, as the room absorbed it fully, one truth remained clear above everything else: this was not about what had been said in the moment, it was about what had been believed before it, and how quickly that belief had shaped everything that followed. Nothing rushed the final stage of the moment, because finality does not need speed, it needs precision, and that was exactly what filled the showroom now: not tension, not confrontation, but a quiet, structured unfolding of consequence. And as the system completed its processes in the background, the woman with the tablet glanced down once more, her eyes scanning the finalized report that had been building in real time since the first interaction began, and when she looked up, her posture remained unchanged, professional, composed, but there was a clear transition in her tone, something more conclusive, more definitive. "The review has reached its initial determination," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the room without force, and every person present understood that this was the moment where everything moved from observation to outcome, from documentation to decision, and Ethan stood still, not bracing, not resisting, just present, because by now, he understood that whatever came next was not negotiable, not adjustable, it was the result of everything that had already been recorded, and the man at the terminal stepped slightly to the side, his task complete, allowing the focus to return fully to the center of the room, and the woman continued, her words precise, each one placed with intention. "Based on the documented interaction and violation of customer engagement protocol, your position as acting sales manager is terminated effective immediately." And the sentence did not echo, it settled, final and irreversible, not loud, not aggressive, just absolute, and for a moment, no one moved, not because they were surprised, but because they understood the weight of what had just been said, the transition from authority to absence, from control to consequence, and Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering slightly, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Because denial had no place left to stand, and he nodded once, a small, contained gesture that acknowledged the outcome without attempting to reshape it, and the woman continued without pause, because the system does not stop at a single correction, it ensures alignment across the entire structure. "Further review of staff conduct and compliance procedures at this location will continue," she added, her gaze briefly shifting toward the rest of the team before returning to neutral. "All personnel will be subject to evaluation under revised oversight." And the words expanded the moment beyond a single individual, placing it within a larger framework, one that addressed not just the action, but the environment that allowed it, and the young associate felt that fully, her posture straightening slightly as the responsibility extended outward, not as pressure, but as awareness, because this was no longer about what had happened, it was about what would happen next, how things would change, how they would not return to what they were before, and the receptionist nodded subtly, her hands resting still now, her role in the process complete, her understanding clear, and the security guard remained in place, neutral, observing, because his function had been replaced by something more systemic, more precise, and the couple near the convertible stood quietly, their presence unchanged, but their perspective altered, as if they had witnessed not just a moment, but a shift in how moments like this are handled. And Darius stood at the center of it all, his expression steady, not celebratory, not satisfied, just grounded, because this was never about reaction, it was about resolution, and after a brief pause he spoke, his voice calm, carrying the same clarity that had defined every word he had spoken since the beginning. "Make sure the training reflects this," he said, not as a suggestion, but as a directive rooted in something larger than the moment itself. "Not just the outcome, but the process that should have happened before it." And the woman nodded once, her response immediate. "It will be included in the compliance revision," she said, and that exchange marked the final transition, from incident to implementation, from correction to prevention, and Ethan, now standing outside the structure he once operated within, glanced once more across the room, not searching, not questioning, just observing, as if taking in the full scope of what had unfolded, and then he stepped back, a single, measured movement, creating space where he once occupied control, and that space did not feel empty, it felt resolved, and as the system finalized its updates, as the showroom settled into its new alignment, one truth stood clear, not just in that room, but beyond it. This was not about removing a person, it was about removing a pattern, and ensuring that what replaced it was built on something stronger, something verified, something real. The showroom did not return to what it had been, because moments like this do not end, they imprint, they settle into the walls, into the people, into the way decisions will be made long after the room empties, and as the final system updates completed in silence, the environment felt recalibrated, not louder, not quieter, but clearer, like something invisible had been wiped clean, and everyone standing there could feel it. Whether they understood it fully or not, and Darius remained where he was for a moment longer, not out of hesitation, not out of necessity, but because presence matters, especially at the end of something that was never about a single interaction, but about a pattern that had just been exposed and corrected, and his eyes moved across the showroom one last time, not judging, not searching, just observing, taking in the space as it existed now, not as it had been when he first walked in. And the young associate met his gaze briefly, her expression steady. Respectful, not forced, not rehearsed, but earned through what she had witnessed, and she gave a small nod, not as an employee, but as someone who had learned something in real time, something that would stay with her long after this moment passed, and the receptionist stood composed behind the desk, her posture aligned with the new structure, her understanding no longer shaped by assumption but by process, and even the security guard, still positioned near the entrance, carried a different awareness now, his role unchanged in title but transformed in meaning, because authority, once seen clearly, is never misunderstood the same way again, and the couple near the convertible remained for a moment longer, as if reluctant to leave before fully processing what they had just experienced, their earlier intent to browse now replaced with something quieter, more reflective, because they had not just seen a situation unfold. They had seen a system correct itself, and that leaves a different kind of impression, one that does not fade quickly, and Darius finally took a step back from the car he had been standing beside, his hand brushing lightly against its surface one last time, not as ownership, not as interest, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the object that had started the moment, and how little it had actually mattered in the end, because this was never about the vehicle, never about the price tag, never about access to something material. It had always been about access to respect, to recognition, to the basic act of being seen without assumption, and as he turned toward the exit, his movement was unhurried, steady, the same calm that had defined him from the beginning carrying through to the end, because nothing about this moment had changed who he was, it had only revealed who everyone else chose to be, and just before reaching the door, he paused, not dramatically, not for attention. Just enough to let one final thought settle into the space behind him, his voice calm, clear, carrying without force. The difference between power and presence, he said, not turning, not needing to, is that power can be questioned, but presence reveals itself. And the words lingered, not because they demanded reaction, but because they completed the moment, they framed it, they gave it something that would remain after everything else moved on, and without waiting for acknowledgement, without needing it, he stepped forward and walked out into the light beyond the glass doors, leaving the showroom behind, but not unchanged, never unchanged, and as the door closed softly behind him, the space remained still for a second longer, holding on to what had just occurred, before slowly, quietly, life resumed, not as it was before, but as something slightly more aware, slightly more precise, shaped by a moment that did not shout, did not force, but proved, completely and without question, that dignity does not need to be demanded when it is already owned.